Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
The story of the UK is an economy that has got real momentum.
What is broken can be repaired. What is ruined can be rebuilt.
UK inflation is becoming much more homegrown.
We have huge potential as an economy in the UK.
This is a time to tell Israel there is a path to peace.
Our plan for the British economy is working, but the work is not done.
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Ailbhe.
Welcome to the Politics programme, Ailbhe. It's lovely to have you sitting beside me in such a busy week in Westminster, and one where, well, the Prime Minister, how is he doing?
So last night, Caroline, we had the 1922 committee, which political nerds will be familiar with, but basically it's a sort of the meeting of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, the MPs and the Lords. And last night they were addressed by Rishi Sunak, which doesn't happen very often. So after all of this chat last week about whether he could be ousted by his party, whether Penny Mordaunt would replace him, we all, as journalists, flocked to wait outside. And to hear the banging of the tables, which is this sort of traditional thing that they do to show support, really just for the journalists hanging around outside. Basically, he told that group that he's been quite angry with those rebels, which is interesting. Multiple sources have told us he was quite revved up, fired up, most passionate they've seen him.
Yes, I saw passionate.
Yes. So I actually think that the key message from it is actually that Rishi Sunak is probably safe until at least the May elections, that this did something to kind of quash nerves. And crucially, Caroline, he gave them a bit of extra holiday. Tory MPs are essentially on Easter holiday from now. They won't be doing their Rwanda bill until after Easter. Officially, we have another week to go, but they're on a one-line whip, which essentially means you can stay at home. It doesn't matter if you're in to vote.
There was also quite an interesting line from Jacob Rees-Mogg, right, on the kind of supporting side of things. I mean, they're really doing their best, and we heard it at Prime Minister's Questions that we were covering yesterday. I mean, there's a lot of kind of sound and noise coming out of MPs to try to show support, given how fractured we know the party is.
Yes, so all the poor Conservative MPs have to traipse past the group of journalists who wait outside as they leave these meetings. And Jacob Rees-Mogg really performed for the occasion and telling us all that, you know, he supports the Prime Minister. I won't do the accent, but he supports the Prime Minister, and he hopes that he'll be in office as long as Walpole, which was 2 decades.
Yes, so. Absolutely, 21 years. That's quite something. Okay, well, that's what's been going on in Westminster, but also there have been some other big stories actually outside of Westminster of interest. The Irish Prime Minister and Taoiseach stood down yesterday. It was a really surprise decision. What did you make of it?
It took me by surprise.
Did it?
Yeah, well, there was this two referenda really recently, which the government unexpectedly lost, basically on slight tweaks to the Irish constitution to make it, I suppose, more socially progressive. There have been referenda, quite famous ones that people in Britain would have been aware of a few years ago on abortion and gay marriage, which Ireland voted for. These ones were rejected, which was a shock to the government and all the opposition parties that backed the changes. So I think that had a destabilising effect, but we've just had St Patrick's Day, which is quite a big, as well as a fun day, is a quite important diplomatic moment for Ireland. Yes. So Leo Varadkar was over in Washington. Simon Harris, who's now likely to replace him, was over here in London at the Irish Embassy for our St Patrick's Day event at the Irish Embassy for the political and press pack.
Yes.
So we've all seen him quite recently. There was no inkling at that point that Leo Varadkar could be going, or that Simon Harris, our guest of honour, could soon actually be the Irish leader. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Okay then, so within touching distance of that, well, of course we've been talking all about this issue and what is next for Ireland, of course, which, you know, faces economic issues and pressures there on housing, on immigration in particular, even though obviously Ireland is actually one of the most wealthy countries per capita. We've been talking about it with a former Irish ambassador, in fact, to the United States. He was ambassador under Leo Varadkar, and this is Daniel Mulhall. We started off by asking the ambassador just how surprised he was about Leo Varadkar's resignation.
Yeah, I saw a posting about it on X about a half an hour before the the press conference that he gave on the steps of government buildings in Dublin. And frankly, I was completely surprised, as I think everyone else was, including members of his own party, even members of the government. I remember years ago when I first met him, when he was a minister in the government back maybe 10 or 12 years ago. He told me that he was never going to be a lifer in politics, that he was always planning to have a second wind, a second phase to his career, that he wouldn't be spending 40, 50 years in Parliament, that he was going to go on and do something else. So it doesn't surprise me that he has decided to call time on his political career, but the timing is certainly one that came as a surprise to almost everyone in Ireland, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I mean, we can go on to the factors maybe influencing his decision in a moment, but do you have any inkling of what he might do next then?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't think there's anything lined up. There's no European job that I could see him being able to get. I mean, he could potentially, I suppose, become president of the European Council, but that will depend on what happens in the European Parliament elections. And the EPP, the European People's Party, the Christian Democrats that he's a member of, they already probably are going to have the Commission with Ursula von der Leyen probably being reappointed. So that probably doesn't leave any room for another Christian Democrat like himself to take on one of the other big roles in Europe. The Commission position is already kind of promised to the other party in the coalition, Fianna Fáil, so that's probably not an option. Maybe he might decide to follow in the footsteps of Nick Clegg, who, after being Deputy Prime Minister in Britain, went on to become the global corporate affairs person at Facebook. So who knows? There may be some company out there that has him in their sights. I'm sure he will find something. He's a very able man, and I'm sure he'll find something productive to do with the remaining years of his active career. Yeah.
I mean, pointing to the US, yes. Of course, we saw Leo Varadkar on St. Patrick's Day at the White House only recently.
And remember, he was also part of the Washington Ireland program, which is a program that brings Irish people, young Irish graduates to Washington for a summer. He was part of that when he was a student or just after he graduated. So he has some track record in the United States, and he certainly enjoys going there. Whenever I've been with him in the United States, he clearly enjoyed me there. But I have no idea what he might do. I suspect he's going to take some time. I mean, he will be a serving member of Parliament until the next election, which is either later this year or more likely early next year. And until then, I guess he has time to figure out where he goes from here with his career. But we haven't heard the end of him. I'm sure he will be prominent in some walk of life in the years and decades ahead.
So you think he's eyeing up something interesting ahead. But going back to the factors influencing this decision, can you take us through some of those? It hasn't been an easy time for him and his party.
Yeah, no, he took over the party from Enda Kenny. And, he was obviously very young at the time. He was 38 when he became Taoiseach, which is a very young age for Irish politics, in any political system, really, to be the head of government at 38 is quite something. So that was a huge achievement. I think his party saw him as a kind of a representative of a kind of a new Ireland, given his his background and his sexual orientation. All of these things made him very different from the maybe average or traditional typical Irish politician of the past. I would have to say that his electoral impact, his electoral appeal was maybe not what the party had expected of him, in that, in the last election in 2020, his party lost a significant number of seats and ended up in a coalition with their historical rivals, Fianna Fáil, for the first time in history. The two parties are in government together now for the last 5 years. And you have to commend him, by the way, on that, because when that coalition was first formed, a lot of people would have said this won't last more than a year or two. It's lasted the full term, and now Fianna Fáil are happy to serve under a new Taoiseach, whoever becomes the next leader of Fine Gael after Leo Varadkar. So that's one thing you'd have to put on the positive ledger for him. But his electoral appeal maybe turned out to be less powerful than his party had expected when they made him leader back in 2017.
the contest is well underway to replace him. The first person to definitely be contesting this is Simon Harris. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about him? And do you think it's likely that it will be him succeeding Leo Varadkar and becoming the next Irish Taoiseach?
I mean, it's looking like it. One of the other, potentially strong contenders, Simon Coveney, who's deputy leader of the Fine Gael party, he decided not to stand. He stood last time against Leo Varadkar and was defeated fairly narrowly. So he's someone that stepped out of the race. I noticed that quite a few prominent people in Fine Gael have already come in behind Simon Harris. So the only other two potential contenders would be the Minister for Social Welfare, Heather Humphreys, who's from a border constituency and would have very good connections in Northern Ireland through her family and through her just geographical location. And then there's also Pascal Donoghue, who is someone I greatly admire and would love to see him, in the highest office in the land. But Pascal Donoghue has a European job. He is president of the Eurogroup, which is a very significant position within the European Union, and he may be unwilling to give that up in order to contest the leadership and be Taoiseach for maybe only 7 or 8 months, because the next election, who knows what the outcome of that's going to be. There's no guarantee that whoever becomes Taoiseach now will be Taoiseach after the next election. So I would say at this stage, Simon Harris is looking like a very strong contender. I mean, I know him from the time when I was in London. I remember he was a junior minister responsible for the financial services industry. And he came to London to me. At the time, he was probably in his, late 20s and looked much younger. I remember bringing him down to the City of London and, to meet the people in the city. And, I could see when we walked into the room, the grey suits there were looking askance at this young guy. And he absolutely wowed them. So he's a very, very capable individual. I remember during COVID, he was health minister, and he gave these nightly broadcasts, nightly Facebook postings, which I actually watched, even though I was in Washington at the time, because I thought they were very effective and he was a good communicator. So I would say he'll do a very good job. Now, by the way, he, I think, will actually be, if he becomes Taoiseach later next month, he will, I think, be the youngest Taoiseach ever, because I think he's currently younger than what Leo Varadkar was when he became Taoiseach back in 2017.
That's interesting. But in terms of the substantial differences between Simon Harris and Leo Varadkar, can we expect any big changes if Simon Harris replaces him?
Well, I mean, I think Harris is a good communicator. He's maybe a more natural politician than Leo Varadkar. Leo Varadkar has a very reserved personality. So, I mean, he wouldn't be, central casting for a politician. He doesn't really go in for the kind of bonhomie and kind of glad-handing, nor does Simon Harris particularly, but I think he would have more of those kind of natural political gifts that maybe Leo Varadkar may have lacked when the spotlight was turned on him.
The next challenge, of course, will be an election in Ireland. And we've written a lot about the possibility of Sinn Féin as a significant electoral force in the next election. I mean, just looking at the Sunday Independent Ireland Thinks poll last month, Sinn Féin 27%, Fine Gael at 20%, Fianna Fáil at 18%. Irish unification is obviously the most significant issue for Sinn Féin. Would that be the policy, though, that would dominate a next general election? How significant is, or would it be the economy?
No. Look, I mean, the next election, like everywhere else in the world at the moment, will be dominated by people's general grumpiness. Even though the economy is doing quite well, all the figures are pretty good over the last number of years. There's full employment and so forth. But people, as in Britain, as in the United States, as elsewhere in Europe, there's a certain grumpiness around at the moment. People, I think inflation has had a very big impact on people, because people have sort of, you don't really notice a pay rise that you get, but you do notice when your petrol costs more or when prices in the shops go up, you notice that.
So it'll be the economy rather than Mary Lou McDonald, for example, talking about reunification and touching distance.
Well, I think the issue of immigration for the first time in our history, will be an issue. About 20% of the population of Ireland now were born outside the state. In the last 2 years, we've taken in 100,000 Ukrainians. Nobody has any particular objection to that. But at the same time, it does mean that facilities are stretched and so forth. And there have been some examples recently of popular resistance, a backlash against immigration, not directed at Ukrainians, directed more at maybe people from, asylum seekers from other parts of the world. But nonetheless, that issue, which no Irish party has taken on and made its own, but certainly individuals are likely to try and stir the pot on immigration over the next number of months. But I don't think we'll see any party developing an anti-immigrant position. But I do think that the issue of immigration, in the last poll I saw, it was one of the top issues on people's minds. So, I mean, the country is changing rapidly. So far, we've coped well with those changes. But, people can become uneasy. And when they do, political consequences can flow from that. People can change their votes because they feel uneasy about the future of the country. And a lot of people, I think, are beginning to feel that way at the moment. And
just quickly, is there a chance that that election will happen sooner than expected? Sinn Féin have been calling for an election immediately with this change of
I don't
leader.
think so. I mean, I mean, as in Britain, as in most countries that have a parliamentary system, the government of the day decides when the election will be held. And I know that the other two parties, certainly in government and probably Fine Gael too, are keen to let the government run its full term and go into, the early months of next year. So, I mean, I could see it being maybe coming in October, November, but not before then. And probably now at this stage, it looks more likely that it will be January, February, because I think there'll be a desire to give the new Taoiseach, the new leader of Fine Gael, a chance to, to bed in and to build a reputation in the country. I think, I think the next election in Ireland will be a cliffhanger, because unlike Britain, where you have a first past the post system and so forth, and it's winner takes all, in Ireland, we will probably never again have one party government. We're going to have 2, 3, maybe 4 parties in government in order to form a majority. So I'm not making any bets on, I mean, Sinn Féin are likely to be the biggest party, but are they likely to be able to form a coalition? You've probably seen in the opinion polls that if you add the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael vote together, it's quite a bit ahead of the Sinn Féin vote. So it's going to all depend on who can find coalition partners to give them the necessary majority in Parliament to be able to form a government.
So that was the former Irish ambassador to the United States, Daniel Mulhall, speaking to us about Leo Varadkar, what he may do next, and saying that actually he thinks that the Irish government is going to go to the full term of governance. So very interesting conversation there. Should we turn our attention, though, to what's happening here in the UK and to Keir Starmer? He's been accused of not listening to the Labour Party's advisor on race relations. The Times has reported that Doreen Lawrence complained that gatekeepers around the Labour leader had prevented her work. Baroness Lawrence is the mother of the murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence. She reportedly said that she no longer knew how to respond to complaints about the party leadership for black and minority ethnic voters. Joining us now to discuss this is Martin Forde KC, the author of the Forde Report, published in 2022, that was commissioned by Keir Starmer, looking into allegations of racism, sexism and bullying into the Labour Party. Martin, welcome back to the programme. We've spoken before. Very good to speak to you again. You know Baroness Lawrence. Is she unhappy with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party?
I met her at the end of last year, which was an absolute privilege, and she actually got me into the House of Lords to watch a bit of a debate, and I discussed with her the fact that at a meeting that I attended remotely with Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner and the Black Caucus of MPs, there'd been dissatisfaction expressed about how the black vote was valued or not valued, and discrepancies as they perceived them in disciplinary matters. And his response was very much that he was advised on these matters by Baroness Lawrence. I've seen the reported comments. They don't come as a surprise to me, because she was obviously very uncomfortable about the race relations meeting, which seemed to exclude, I think, some activists that had initially been invited. And certainly when we were discussing these issues, she was indicating that she was finding it quite difficult to have meetings with the leader.
And on that, Baroness Lawrence has reportedly said that she's found that there are gatekeepers, as she puts it, around Keir Starmer who have been stopping things from happening. Do you recognise that?
I think this is difficult. Obviously, a leader can't micromanage every aspect of communications and policy, and will delegate to people. But certainly the impression that's given And the expectation, I suspect, if you are given a sort of title as being an advisor to the leader, then possibly you have an entitlement to expect fairly unfettered and direct access.
Do you think it has become a bit tokenistic, Baroness Lawrence's title?
I don't think, I mean, I think she's certainly got lots of drive and enthusiasm for the topic. And I mean, it's truly humbling to meet her. I think that what I picked up in the report and through the 1,100 submissions that we received, and I've emphasised, I know they're a self-selecting group, there'll be people who are unhappy. There was a perception that certain types of protected characteristics were treated differently to others, and there was real frustration around the treatment of Black and Asian councillors, their participation at local government level in cabinet positions, being selected to be MPs and matters of that sort, administrative suspensions, it's thought there was a lower threshold before they were applied, and they were sometimes timed people to thwart their election prospects, so just before a selection meeting or matters of that sort. We've had the recent example of Sonia Winifred, who voted, I think, with the Green Party for a ceasefire in Gaza, which I think became official Labour policy before she was then suspended by her CLP. So there are real grumblings of discontent in terms of how seriously the party are taking allegations of anti-Black, anti-Asian, anti-Muslim behaviour.
Well, you've mentioned one example. Do you think that the failure to restore the whip to Diane Abbott, also the length of the process for Diane Abbott, is also a driving factor for these tensions now? Does that amount to prejudice?
Well, I think it's difficult. I mean, assuming, I have a kind of qualify my answer, if all that the whip has been withdrawn for is making comments about, I think it was Irish people, travellers and people of the Jewish faith facing prejudice but not lifelong racism that Black people do, I paraphrase. If that's all there is, it seemed to me at the time, and I said this last April, that there was nothing to investigate. And it does seem ironic that, you know, a blatantly racist comment or comments made by a Tory donor, we have Kemi Badenoch talking about contrition and the Prime Minister saying, you know, he's apologised, nothing to see here, when he's only apologised for rudeness, when it, to me, it was disgusting racism. That's acceptable, but an apology issued within minutes or hours is not. There's also dissatisfaction about Kate Ossamore's suspension from the whip for mentioning the situation in Gaza on World Holocaust Day. Again, I think she apologised certainly within 24 hours. And if there's nothing else to investigate, it seems to me that, you know, there should be the possibility of imposing a sanction quite quickly. Rupa Huck, I think it took her to have the whip restored. It took about 6 months when she made the comments about Kwasi Kwarteng, which she apologised for, I think, almost immediately, as soon as they were leaked to the Daily Mail. And so there's definitely a sense that there's a disparity in treatment. Whether that amounts to prejudice or not, I can't say.
Is this really about the sidelining of the Labour left by Keir Starmer's leadership? Is that what is driving this, do you think?
I think that this is, again, seen to be a bit of an intersectionality between faction and outcome. Now, that was as much argued to be the case under the previous leader, Mr. Corbyn, when there were suggestions that the length of time it took to discipline Ken Livingstone was because he was close to Jeremy Corbyn. And as you know, that all got investigated around political interference. And Mr. Corbyn denied that he was directly involved in deciding which cases went forward and which ones didn't. And in fact, we found that his, I think, Chief of Staff, Carrie Murphy, quite properly, when asked for a decision around disciplinary matters, said that's none of our business. It's not helpful in terms of perception that Diane Abbott is identified as being allied to Jeremy Corbyn. And I think one of the things that slightly surprises me is what they perceive to be the marginalisation of the Black and Asian Parliamentary Party. I'm not surprised that they are left-leaning, most of them, because, you know, big government, whether it be Thatcherism or John Major or Blairism, hasn't done very much for the life chances of the ethnic minorities in this country. And so to me, it's no surprise that they think, well, is there a different model? And one that hasn't been tried is one that's a bit more left of centre. But there's definitely correlation between faction, who controls the NEC, and outcomes, it seems to me. But that seems to be the case, whichever faction is in charge.
I mean, Keir Starmer, just will quote what he has said around Diane Abbott, talking about how Diane Abbott has suffered a lot of racial abuse over many, many years, and that doesn't take away, in Keir Starmer's words, from the fact that he condemns the words that she used. This is over the idea of whether there could be a hierarchy of racism. So paraphrasing what Keir Starmer has said on the issue. Look, is there...
Well, I think Doreen Lawrence has also said she doesn't think on a personal level that Mr. Starmer is anything other than committed to anti-racism. He certainly made good progress, because the relationships he has with JLM and the Board of Jewish Deputies are not the kind of relationships that Mr. Corbyn enjoyed. I think the issue for her and Parliamentary Labour Party and for black CLP members is that they don't seem to feel that they have the party's attention around this issue as perhaps other protected characteristics, and they feel rather taken for granted.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you then. What can Starmer do to change that perception that seems to be taking hold now?
Well, there have been a number of opportunities, it seems to me, that are missed. So I think last August there was a right-wing press attack on Jackie McKenzie, who was one of his race advisors, working for nothing, and who's received death threats because she was identified as an immigration lawyer and a woke and lefty. And Dominic Grieve, quite properly, as a barrister but a Tory, came out in support of her and said strongly, this lady's just doing her job. And I think the legal profession were quite dismayed that there wasn't a stronger response from Keir Starmer. And I think over the blatant racism of Mr. Hester, I had a lot of extremely distressed, high-flying professional women, predominantly lawyers, within a WhatsApp group that I'm a member of, who were really, really triggered by the language, and who'd had to have difficult conversations with their both sons and daughters about that lack of acceptance. And one of the things I found most insulting was the idea that not only did the Tory ministers come out and say this is an apology when quite clearly it wasn't, and he's gone to ground, but the fact that it was said in a private setting, which I think Kemi Badenoch prayed in aid. My experience of racism among the chattering classes is that that's precisely when they tell the truth. When they think they're in a safe space with like-minded people, they let their guard down. So to my mind, the fact it was a private meeting makes it an aggravating feature, not a mitigating one. They expected a stronger reaction in support of black MPs. Angela Rayner went on the record very early and said the whip should be restored. I think it's very difficult for the leader of the Labour Party to stand at the dispatch box condemning Hester's language whilst Diane Abbott languishes as an independent MP. If ever there was a time when she needed the Labour Party to wrap their arms around her and show what it seems to be now.
And I just want to add also on that point that Diane Abbott herself has talked about how it is extraordinary that the Labour Party has been fundraising off the back of the row over Hester's donations and comments about her. And she is quoted in one newspaper as saying, hypocritical barely covers it.
Yeah. Well, I think, and again, this is incredibly damaging to the Labour Party in terms of their black electoral base, and particularly around black professional women. It would appear, if one looks at the voting patterns in the last 10 to 15 years, that the West African and Asian populations are moving to the right. And what I think the black population of this country want is a very, very strong attack on racism. And I think they feel quite strongly that there's a reticence to discuss these issues, possibly because they're trying to attract a vote which isn't troubled by racism. I mean, it's very difficult to know what they're being told by their focus group. But if anything's said that's pro the migrant population and its contribution to this country, is that seen as encouraging immigration? I'm not quite sure what the party line is. And I think that it's time the party really clarified where they stand on this issue and made very, very strong statements.
Martin Forde, thank you very much for joining us. So that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo, and our audio engineers were Marufa Hussain and Sean Guastamakia. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Ailbhe. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.